So there's not much that you need to remember. Just remember this. You're not here to achieve a particular state. You're not here to achieve anything. Because if you think you're here to achieve a state, to reach a state, it takes you back into time and future and effort and struggling and frustration. You're simply here to learn to be aligned with now. Does that take time? Asks one mind in this room. Yes and no. On the outer realm, of course, there is time. We meet here at a particular time, we spend a period of time here, but it all points to a deeper dimension of the timeless. Forms in which the very same teaching appears. There tend to be older forms. If you look into ancient teachings, you will find the same message. But you have to extricate the message from the cultural accumulations around the teaching and the foreign languages and the strange words. This is the same arising here in a way that is, I'm not dismissing the ancient teachings, they're beautiful, and if you are able to extricate the essence, they still work for you. And this is the same teaching, but perhaps with an added empowerment. Because, well, this is good news and bad news at the same time. I was going to say, and I'm saying, we are running out of time in many senses of the word. Fortunately, we're running out of time. When the ancient teachings arose, they still had more time. Humanity could afford to be unconscious and insane for a few more thousand years. Now perhaps we have another 100 years during which we could afford to be insane, and then that would be it. The planet couldn't take anymore. And by then humans would probably have created so much havoc, they would have self-destructed through violence. Could we, for a moment, do we have any source of noise that for a moment we could turn off and we can simply enjoy the field of stillness? Ultimately, stillness is within, but the outer stillness can be a help. a little bit of noise in this age of machinery. Paying attention to stillness. Underneath any noise that there may be, there's a field of stillness. Usually, if you are the mind, you're only aware of that which arises, the noises. You would pay attention to that, be interested in that. Usually, humans would be unaware of the silence, the stillness in which the noises exist, out of which the noise comes, into which the noise returns. The field, the underlying field of stillness. So while you're here and you walk out in nature, there is a stillness all around. Of course, there are also a few noises, but I recommend this practice to you. Pay more attention to the field of stillness than to any noise you hear. The noises are there anyway, they're beautiful in nature. At night, the many, many noises, that many little beings that come to life at night and make a noise, and that there's an underlying field. One could say it's the canvas on which, in this case, the noises are painted. It's the field of stillness. So you pay attention to that. There are certain kinds of music also, where that point, like the Japanese flute, maybe you may have listened to it this morning, we may listen to some more here. The sounds point beyond themselves to the silence out of which they come. That is the deepest spiritual music, where the sounds only point beyond themselves to the silence. And so they enable the listener to enter the state of, this is the beauty when you listen to silence, you pay attention to silence, the mind becomes still. You cannot otherwise pay attention to silence. The mind can only pay attention to that which arises, the form, the noise that comes out of the silence. The more you pay attention to silence, you've gone beyond thought, because it's not with thinking that you can pay attention to silence, because there's nothing to think about. There's no form in it. This is another little device that can take you to that state of consciousness that is beyond form, the spaciousness. And when you walk in nature, it will deepen your way of being there when you pay attention to that field of stillness. And you will get a great sense of sacredness that is all pervasive throughout nature. And that is beyond the forms, that they are beautiful too. But there is a whole within which, W-H-O-L, a whole in which all these forms appear. A field. And that is the essence of sacredness. So the noises that you hear are the equivalent of your mental noise, of thoughts appearing. And the silence out of which the noises come are the equivalent of the inner state of stillness, which is pure awareness prior to thought arising. So these are little, I call them portals sometimes. The most powerful portal is perhaps allowing this moment to be. It also takes you beyond form. Another portal is listening to silence, especially out in nature. That also takes you beyond form. Now the silence, you may not have it all the time. In this civilization, it's hard sometimes to even find a place where there's silence. But you'll be amazed, even in a relatively noisy place, you may still be able to become aware of an underlying field of stillness, even in the midst of noise, because ultimately it's within. And in the end, it doesn't matter anymore. You could be in the middle of a huge city, surrounded by heavy traffic. And you're so okay with it, this moment, that there's great stillness in you. That stillness comes with a yes to what is. The compulsive noise persists with a no to what is. Thoughts that may be going through your head don't matter that much as you sit here. There's a stillness underneath the thoughts and in between. From the point of view of thought, that is nothing. An alert stillness. It's in everyone, even those who are completely trapped in mental noise. One could say, so to speak, underneath that there's a pool of stillness, but they don't know it. And that stillness, as it arises when the screen of thought loses its density, then from underneath thought stillness arises. And the arising stillness is what I call the new state of consciousness. And as you know, all words are limited. And the reason why we're here is to allow that to happen. And in many of you, even before you came here, that arising was already happening. So here there's an intensification of it, or a deepening. And as I pointed out yesterday, you're not really here to add anything to your mind. That's fine, those you can go to lectures at universities and add things to your mind. That's fine, but the reason why we are here is not that. pointers. The words are not there as added baggage to your mind, but they are simply pointers beyond that, helpful pointers. So we are here for the arising of presence. One could say an evolutionary transformation, because so far most humans have lived and are living in a very different state, the normal state of consciousness, which is continuous thought streams and identification with those continuous thought streams as a self, a me. So everyone carries a heavy burden of personal selfhood, if that's a word that exists, I think it does. Everyone carries the burden of a personalized me, contracted and personalized sense of self. And I say burden because there's a heaviness to it. And as you go through life, you feel this heaviness, and people perceive it as the heaviness of living. Another day, and more stuff happening, and another problem. What's the point of it all? The last straw, that's the last thing that I needed. So there's the burden, and then there comes the last straw. And it probably won't be the last. And so there's this heaviness of me. I have to carry me around all the time. And if that weren't enough, there's the living past in me, both personal and racial, meaning belonging to the whole human race. And the pain of that, because humans have generated so much pain through living in such a way, reducing their lives to a little personalized sense of self, which sometimes tries to make itself bigger by identifying with the collective, a tribe or religion or nation, but it's the same heaviness. Identifying with the collective for a moment looks like liberation from a little personal me, but it's the illusion of liberation. In fact, you've gone into something even worse, even heavier. So then humans carry pain inside from the human past, emotional residue of emotional pain, of suffering. And they don't see it as that. Through unconscious identification with it, it becomes part of one's personalized sense of self. So it was heavy enough already, and now it gets even heavier, because the whole heaviness of human existence in a state of consciousness that could be described as ignorant, not ignorant in the sense of not knowing enough, but ignorant of who you truly are. So you carry the burden, really, of the whole of humanity with its heavy past, and believe it to be yourself. And then you interpret whatever is happening around you through that. And you can imagine, and perhaps you know from your experience, I know it from my last experience, how distorted everything gets when you interpret the world around you through the heaviness of a painful, often, more often than not, painful, personalized sense of self, of me. And then you see all those situations out there, and all those people out there that seem to have been put there by some demon to make my life painful. That's the interpretation. And that's what it looks like. That's what the world looks like from that point of view, ultimately illusory viewpoint, perspective. And then you begin to fight against situations and people because you perceive them as your enemies. And then you create the world that when you switch on the TV, that's what you see when millions live in that way. Not that each one manifests that condition in the same degree of intensity. No. The degrees of intensity, the degrees of ignorance that manifests through you differs. Nobody in this room probably would perpetrate acts of terrorism or carry a bomb around on your body and go to a public place and then detonate it and eliminate yourself and another 100 people. That requires extreme degree of ignorance, but it is the same mechanism at work, the same misinterpretation, the same fighting the external enemy to get rid of my pain. So that's the human condition. And again, the human condition is not a personal problem of yours. It is the human condition. Now, that personal sense of selfhood sometimes dissolves in the face of extreme danger. We talked a little bit about it yesterday. It can dissolve in the face of imminent death sometimes. It can also dissolve when there's intense suffering, which of course is generated by that itself. So the redemptive factor about the whole sad story is that the very suffering that it generates for yourself and others ultimately wakes you up too, because you can't stand it anymore. So there's a self-destruct mechanism built into the illusion by the grace of God. But that could take time. Unless you run out of time. And so the alternative to needing more time for that to happen, to become free, and the alternative to needing more suffering, needing more pain, needing more drama, until finally you can't stand it anymore. The alternative to that is sitting here. And in a much more gentle way, allow that personalized sense of self to dissolve, because it wants to dissolve, or rather something is emerging from underneath that wants to, it's pushing through. So when I said it wants to dissolve, that's not quite true. It doesn't want to dissolve. It does and it doesn't. It wants to continue, it has a momentum, but ultimately it also wants its own destruction. Yes, the two are true. And you can see it in excessive cases of extreme manifestations of that unconscious state, that it seeks its own destruction. If it can destroy others in the same process, so much the better. We can see it reflected in the events of past week. You can see it in many people's lives that are very unhappy. A self-destructive urge in many, almost addictive. I certainly had it, and it worked. The self destructed itself. Now you may have, this is a gentle way of the arising of presence. You may already have gone through more violent forms of transformation, of suffering. You've had your suffering. And perhaps that's cracked you open. There was the screen of mind and of thought streams, and the density of pain body and identification with all that of me, a dense, heavy personal selfhood. And then perhaps for quite a few of you, something happened either to you or in your surroundings, to someone very close, and it cracked open that density. And whether it was some great loss, or an illness, or an accident, or suffering or death of someone very close to you, the crack appeared. And at first, of course, a crack like that is very painful. Nobody likes to be hit on the head. And then you begin to realize the enormous grace that is suddenly in your life and that came into your life because of that. And then so much presence begins to emerge through that crack, one could say. The sense of personal selfhood loses its density and something can shine through. Ah. And with that comes a depth, because you have no depth. You have depth, but you don't know it when there is only that screen. When the crack appears, suddenly there is a depth to you. Somebody that I watched on television the other day talking about the disaster of last week actually said, the writer, she said she perceived through the suffering, there was a deepening, a shift from type A personality and a deepening in the collective psyche of this country. And that may be the case because all these things apply whether on the personal or collective level. With that comes a depth, and there comes a humbleness, a humility, no longer a